name is Sue Dudley.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was in the military for 20 years, Air Force pilot. We were married at that point in time, and we were married for 47 years, as a matter of fact. But it was a very adventurous time for me. I loved it.
Uh-huh.
I have the personality for a military wife, I have been told.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've been in several discussions with the old timers.
Uh-huh.
And when we got sent to Newfoundland, one of the guys in Shreveport, we were SAC, and the man in Shreveport said, "Well, this woman is not going to make it." And I remember I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, one of the things is they play bridge all the time. Another thing, they're too close to their mothers." And then the drinking issue. And I'll be darned if everyone that he pinpointed didn't make the 2 years in Newfoundland. So my love was the family.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a military family, and it's extraordinary. And that's what I lived in. And and it was an adventure.
Uh-huh.
It was a awesome thing of watching people cope and watching the fun things and the tough things, and it was extraordinary.
Fantastic. So let's go back a little bit and start with where you come from originally. If you have any history back, military history.
Okay, no. My two brothers, older brothers, were in the Second World War.
Uh-huh.
One was in the crossing the Rhine, and he was 17 when he went in. The other was in the first train that went through Hiroshima in the occupation forces after.
Wow.
They were 10 and 7 years older than I was. But no, I was at the University of Missouri. I was 18 and was from a small lead mining town, population 5,400 in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. And it's another side story, but I ended up going that summer to summer school at the University of Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And there, Marana Air Force Base was there, and it was cadets. They did cadet pilot training. And I met on top of Mount Lemmon, Ronald, and we fell in love. And I went back when he got his wings in Phoenix. And we were married the day before he got his wings. But he got his assignment. That was what he was. He said, if it's fighters, we won't get married. It's too dangerous. But if it's not, we will. Mm-hmm. And he ended up getting, going to be an instructor in T-33s. And we would go to Selma for his training and then back to Big Spring, Texas. And we were there 3 years. Only one of 2 3-year tours. I moved a lot.
Yeah.
So it was quite.
Are T-33 transport planes, or
no,
they're training?
They're training. They train pilots.
Okay.
And they were just. It was a 2-man little fighter type thing.
Gotcha.
It's instructor and pilot. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it was my introduction because when we were leaving the day after he got his wings, we were driving out for the big glorious drive to Shreveport or to Selma, Alabama. Excuse me, and. We stopped by his instructor's house. She had breakfast for us. Mm-hmm. And they'd had a party the night before. And I was very shy and and a major introvert personality. And I went to the bathroom there, and she had a young man asleep in the bathroom tub. And I went out, and I went over, and I said, you've got somebody asleep this man asleep in the bathtub. And she looked at me, and she said, I quite often have someone in the bathtub. She said, he drank a little bit too much last night. I didn't want him. I was concerned about him. So I put him to bed in the bathtub. And then she went on to give me a wedding gift. And it was an address book. Mm-hmm. And she said, always write in it in pencil. Don't ever use pen. Your friends move too much. And you can erase the addresses and change them. And I kept the address book and the promise for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, and it was the first, I look back on it now, the first time I saw that, what I later termed the sisterhood of these women. Yeah. I didn't recognize it when I saw it then. I began to recognize it in the years that passed, and it's powerful and it's important.
me, or was it unusual for a Air Force instructor, pilot instructor, to be a woman back in that?
Oh, I think I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I have a feeling it's an impossibility at that point in time. I think they had some women in airplanes in the war.
Yeah.
But in the world I lived in, no.
I wonder if that was during the war that she was training on the home front so that the male pilots could be released.
Yeah, they did a lot of the grunt work the women pilots did in the Second World War at the end of it. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but our world, we went to Selma, Alabama, and that's where everybody got pregnant. And when we left there, we were there 3 months, and I often tell people that I run into that I was very sick, my first pregnancy. And I threw up all the way to Texas, Big Spring, Texas, and we didn't even stop the car. Ronald would just slow down, and we were so excited. And I'd open the door, and I'd throw up on the road, and we continued on our way. First, we were entering the world that he wanted so much, and that I found so interesting.
Yeah. What was your attraction to it back then? I mean, you come from this small town. Is it?
Well, those pilots to be his friends and the world we lived in, they were on an adventure. Their world had just changed. He was from a small town in Alabama. I mean, it was a miracle to them. They were so excited. They used to do some things that they used to. This was in 54, I guess. Mm-hmm. And they would talk and tell stories. They were having such an adventure there in Tucson. And they would buzz the Grand Canyon. Yeah, they had. And then the other thing they did that they talked about is that they would get in the desert, and a train would be coming down in front of them, and they'd get really low and with their lights on and head right straight to the train and then pull up. And they were young. They were having a wonderful time. They were like 20. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was very exciting.
And so for you, it was, and they represented,
yeah.
I guess, freedom.
I just listened to the stories. I love to listen to the stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was able to participate in that world in a very small way there. Yeah. And then I entered it when we got to Big Spring, Texas. Didn't have any housing, base housing. They had just built an officers club. And when we were in Selma, Alabama, all of us were young, barely. I wasn't 20. Well, I guess I had just turned 20 or 19. And we found somebody who was from Big Spring, Texas, there, a wife. And I had a coffee for her, and we all sat around her like balloons. We were all pregnant in our little smocks and on the floor, and we said, "Tell us." And she said, "Well, they don't have any base housing." Mm-hmm. She said, "They're just building an officers club." She said, "Texas has had an 8-year drought, and last year they had a dust storm, and they lost an airplane on the runway and didn't even know it for 24 hours." Wow. My eyes got about this big. And it was 40 miles from Midland, Texas. Mm-hmm. And I was there for 3 years and fell in love with the Texans, and we were all young, and I had 2 children there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Actually, I live in Texas.
Yeah,
I live in Austin.
Do you?
Yeah. About to move to Houston, which I'm less excited about.
Yeah. Well, Austin's, I haven't been there, but I was an environmentalist, and Austin is one of the things we read about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were there for 3 years, you said?
3 years.
And that was an unusually long time.
No.
To be
that
somewhere.
was a normal.
A three-year stint?
3 year was a normal assignment.
Okay.
Stateside.
Stateside.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said you had 2 children. Then.
I had 2 children.
And their names were?
Rebecca was the first one. There's a story about her, and Wendell was the second. Yeah. Rebecca ended up with a diagnosis. This is funny. She ended up with a diagnosis of brain damage. And we were out at the base, and I said to the doctor, somebody had told, I was so dumb, so naive, that one of the babysitters had set her heads down on her shoulder. And I thought all babies, I hadn't been around babies. And the doctor looked at me like I was some very young, he was tired of these young women. And he reached over and picked her head up to move it, and you couldn't. It was locked. It was down, and just, he grabbed her away from me and ran down the hall with her, and I was running along behind him. And then they got some x-rays and this type of thing. And he said, Ms. Dudley, he said, frankly, I don't know. He said, I think this is what we call a wry neck, where it's been damaged or hurt at birth, and she hasn't used it, and it's stuck down there. But he said, I've only seen one in the book. And he said, all of us here, we're not even MDs. We haven't passed our tests yet.
Oh, wow.
We're just, and we don't know. So we're sending you to a specialist, a pediatrician in Big Spring. And he sent us in there, and the eye doctor did the dilations, and he told me that everything was okay, nerves and stuff. And then the doctor hung her up by her heels in the air, and she was about 6 months old, and she curved all one side, hanging up like this. And he said it's her brain, pressure on the brain. There was some damage at birth. So he sent us back to the base, and he said, they know what to do. I've shown them what to do. So they went in with a long needle and took fluids out of her brain to see if there's blood and pressure. Yeah. And we were in the hospital for about a week. All these tests were coming back. Finally, my doctor, these doctors were so cute, he came in and he said, Ms. Dudley, he said, every baby that has walked into, mother has walked in this hospital with a baby, that baby has been yanked out of her arms and hung up in the air, and they all curve one way or the other. We don't know what to do with you. We're sending you to San Antonio, the big hospital. So the airplane came and got us, Becky and I, and she had the bombardier doors down, and the nurse looked at me and she said, are you it? And I said, yes. Becky was like 6 months. So we went to the big hospital down there, and it was an extraordinary experience. And I was too young and naive to understand buses. I ended up walking down to the hospital, and it was July, I think, and in full Texas heat, yeah. And I had finally called the doctor down there and told him that he had a baby. When I got there about 12 o'clock. It was 3 o'clock before the little corpsman was to take me to the guest house. And I was breastfeeding, and my milk was going away on me. And I hadn't told the doctor. I didn't tell anybody. So the corpsman got me down to the ward. They took Becky in, and I said, she needs something to eat, a bottle, would work. And the nurse said, we don't do that. We feed them at feeding time, and more or less told me to go away. So I went through a fit. The corpsman, who was younger than I was, said, you got to do something. I got to take this woman to the guest house and get her. And so the nurse did give Becky a bottle, let me give her one. And I went to the hospital, and some young pilot's date got kicked out of that room at 3 o'clock in the morning because I had priority. Medical air vac does. And she was there. She was there about 5 days, and it was a wry neck. But he said, the doctor that had her, he was so nice. He was actually, and I'm going to use the word deformed, and that's not correct, but he was kind of hunchback and very lovely man. And it was the mental ward that we were in because of the diagnosis. And when I got there, they had Becky, and he said, Ms. Dudley, he said, I want you to follow me. That man took me through that ward, showed me these children. Remember, one door he opened, and the baby head was the size of a basketball, and mother was feeding it a bottle. And he said, the child won't live to be 21. We saw a child that was insane and in kind of like and then he took me back to Becky. And he said, now you look at a normal, healthy child, and don't you ever consider brain damage. So anyway, they did all the tests. They sent us back to Big Spring. And some big sergeant with hairy, muscled arms had to give her the little exercises at the hospital. He was scared to death of her. He didn't know what to do. And I'm there standing, watching him do this to her neck. And I hear this voice hollering at me down the hall, and I look up, and it's my doctor. And he is coming down that hall, and his little white coat tails are flapping, and he has in his arms a little baby with its head over his shoulder. and some little mother running behind him that looked scared to death. And he got down to me, and he took that baby in his hands like this and shoved it right in my face. He said, "I want you to diagnose this case for me." I said, "That's a wry neck." And he said, "Hot damn, I've had 2 of them." He went running off with the mother and the baby and stuff. Yeah. So we went from there to Shreveport. Well, we went to San Antonio test, again, training, because we went from teaching in T-33s, Ronald did, to SAC, Strategic Air Command, different airplane. And then we went to Shreveport. We were there 2 years. I had another child there, which is another story, but we'll save it, we ended up in Stephenville, Newfoundland for 2 years. And that was, we were in a Quonset hut. When we didn't, you had to have a place to stay for your family to get sent up there.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a place until a week before his orders came through. And we did get to go to Stephenville, Newfoundland. And it was my first real adventure. We got off the ferry at Port aux Basques and drove the 90-mile road. It's the only road they've got. We were on the west side of the island. And in fact, in the tourist literature, they called it the last of the great adventure roads.
Wow.
And it was dirt. It was rocky. When we got there, we never got the back doors of our Ford station wagon open again. I mean, the place had been warped. We saw pieces of cars on the road. It was a crazy place. So we got up there, and the first it was December, and I hadn't had any snow, and I was just like, I can't be in Newfoundland and no snow in December. What's going on here? And it started snowing like the 20th of December, and it quit the 10th of March.
Whoa.
And it 273 inches, and every flake, not one melted. It was absolutely gorgeous. We lived, it came down like popcorn balls. It came down, it blew sideways. We had whiteouts. We ended up walking off the porches or crawling out windows. We lived in a Quonset hut because it just piled up. The base had removal equipment, but the town did not.
Yeah.
And our world became just lines of blue up here and all this white. And when we got up there, we looked at these little houses and we thought, they were pink and green and multicolored, and the fences were and I thought, these people are crazy. Look what they're doing. Well, in the snow, it was like flowers. It was a pink house. It was a greenhouse and all that white. It was extraordinary.
273 inches is enormous.
And not a flake melted. Yeah, it was really something. It was quite a thing. And it was Mounties, Mountie system. And they came to visit us, the women. The guys are on alert all the time, just there. They didn't go anyplace. They went on in the hole, we used to call it. And so we were at home, but we could meet them at the officers' club. They didn't have enough pilots. So 1 month, I think Ronald and I had 23 hours together that he could come home and whatever.
You had 3 kids?
I had 3 children at this point in time.
And they were like pretty much housebound with you?
Well, no, we got out in the snow.
Okay.
Yeah. It was just gorgeous. Once it quit snowing, like the 10th of March, it did that because the ice came in to the bay between Port aux Basques. It was an 8-hour trip from Port aux Basques, or from Nova Scotia to Port aux Basques in a ferry. And you went there overnight. You had a little stateroom and stuff. And Ronald went back to upgrade to aircraft commander for 3 months. And we went out over that snow. And that road that had practically ruined our car, it was the most gorgeous road you've ever seen. It was hard packed, these beautiful conifers on the sides, and there were ice crystals in the air like fog, and they'd shimmer pink and green.
Oh, wow.
It was and we got down to the boat, and it was a round bottom boat. And we got out in the bay, And I thought, oh God, I don't get seasick very often, but the boat was going. We had about, I think, probably 10 people and 2 cars on it. So it was taking no water at all. And until we got out in the between the islands.
Mhm.
And when we did, we hit the ice. And the icebergs were out there, and that ice is gorgeous as it goes down.
Ooh.
So the colors are beautiful. And this ice is out like this, and that boat would back up, and it would rev up just like this, and hit those ice floes and ride up on them, and they'd crack, and it would go down, and then it would back up. Took us 24 hours to get back that day. And the very next day, the ferry got stuck. And they had pictures in Life magazine, and they had to drop food to them. They were there for 2 weeks before they could get them out. But it was
Some
it was
unpleasant living
interesting.
conditions.
Yeah. But then the Cuban Crisis, what was that, 62?
62. Yeah.
Is that when it was?
Yeah.
I think it was like October the 20th. We were SAC. We went into DEFCON 2, which I think they'd been in before. But like the 22nd or 23rd, SAC went into DEFCON 3. They had never been in it before. And Ron was supposed to go to college. We had assignments. We were going to Oklahoma State. and it was a big deal. He'd been trying for 2 years to get college. And SAC just slammed his door shut. Everything stopped. Nothing. And they waited for that meeting off Cuba, whatever. And the guys were allowed to come. When they hit DEFCON 2, they evacuated us on base.
Mm.
And we were given some sort of papers. I wish I had a copy of that to show you. That said we would have the U.S. government guaranteed if we needed money and somebody gave us some money or something to get home, that they would guarantee that they would pay it back. And because the husbands were on,
Yeah.
they were on SAC alert. And they pulled us on base. And those women, they sent women, if they were going to live in kind of an apartment pregnant, one went to the hospital and somebody learned how to help somebody give birth if they needed to. We filled our bathtubs with water. We did everything we could think of, but we didn't know what to do because nobody had been there before.
Yeah.
It was something. They sent the children and me to a lady on base, and her name was Bonnie something or the other. And I was really rattled by the time I got there. I had the kids, I had some blankets and pillows and some food. And I got to her house, and I found her in the basement. And she was in the basement with 3 cases of scotch and about 2 cases of cat food. That was it. She had a cat, Pookie. And she said, everything that's important is here. We're fine. And for some reason, it struck me as funny, and I got over being panicked and started to laugh. We were there, I think, just 2 days before. Well, we were there for quite a while, but I don't know how long SAC was in that. They were there for a long time.
Yeah.
And they finally met, and they kind of came back. We were at the club because the guys could join us at the club. They couldn't drink.
Mhm.
And on alert, that they allowed them to do that. So we'd go out to the club. I think it was probably 3 or 4 weeks. And this major came in, and the whole base was like, oh my God. They had pulled every KC-97 in the United States was sent up. And
What is KC-97?
they were tankers. They were going to refuel the bombers when they went to Russia. That's what we did. That's what they did. So they evacuated every airplane in the United States. They were sent up to us, and they came in. One of them came in. We had stories and stories and stories, but one of them came in, and it had been left on a base, and the base commander had said, has anyone ever flown one of these things before? They had somebody on the base that had been a co-pilot at one time. They had the co-pilot of the airplane had never been in one. The engineer had never seen one. and the boom operator had a broken arm. And in like 24 hours, all these planes came in from the United States. Overnight, we had one of the worst storms. We had storms up there. And they even had ropes on the runways because sometimes the guys had to crawl to the airplanes.
Wow.
That would be that bad. And
the wind was that strong?
Yeah, and a friend of ours was on the, when they came in, was in the tower. And he said we should have evacuated, but we sat on the floor and because these planes were coming in. We didn't have an accident. You know, it came in over the bay. We've got mountains on the other side of us. It was a crazy place. And it was perfect. It was just like, oh my God, you know, it really works.
Yeah. And so Newfoundland, if I've got this geographic right, would be a staging point for a war with Russia. That was the idea.
The airplanes that we had were going to refuel the bombers. Yeah.
Wow.
And if that disaster had happened, our boys didn't have enough gas to get home. They were going to have to ditch. They were going to have to give everything they had to the bombers. You know. So anyway, it was about 3 or 4 days after that, I guess, we were at the officers' club, and this major walks in, and the man is dirty, he's tired, he's wrinkled, he's had it. He had been someplace out west, and his airplane, he'd been on leave, and his squadron had been sent to Newfoundland, and he'd caught airplanes, had rides from cars, he'd been on the bus from Corner Brook down to us, trying to get there, and he'd finally gotten to the base, and he walked in, and we had quite a party that night. Yeah, it was a very interesting thing. But we got home. Oh, and the other thing about that was interesting is we had been told we had been moved into the guest house because we were supposed to be going to college just when this thing hit, and we were eating at the cafeteria. And the cafeteria had all these glass here, and the glass overlooked the runways where the airplanes were. And I had my breakfast tray in my hand, and I'm looking for a place to sit, and we're looking right at these windows. And we were in DEFCON 2, and the alarms went off, and that meant war. You know, that's what that meant. And it was just like, oh my God. And then right in front of us, these guys with their big guns were drop right in front of us. It was just like clockwork. Ronald ran for the telephone, and it was just crazy. What had happened is that somebody was checking. They had all these runways and all these hundreds of planes, wingtip to wingtip, parked on this damn thing, because all the ones had come up. And they had little huts where they had the electricity that handled they had the gas lines were underneath the runways. And some young man had been in there, had checked it, had shorted something. It had sparked up, and it blew up the house, whatever. And the base was afraid that the lines would blow up with all those airplanes on top of it. So they had to evacuate. And the only way to do that was to blow that damn horn, and they blew it. And the guys went to war. I mean, that's what it meant. And they got there without their pants up. They got there without their shoes on. They got there, you know, whatever they were doing, they ran for those airplanes. And they moved them, and we didn't have an accident. For some way, it was perfect. Everything was perfect.
Yeah, I mean, this like brings the Cuban Missile Crisis home to me in a way that it never has before. That it literally was like people were ready to go. It was like,
if that horn blew, it was supposed to be nuclear war. Yeah, but we just moved airplanes, and we didn't damage any of it.
Those guys on a hair trigger, right? Everybody was on a hair trigger.
Everybody was on a hair trigger. Yeah, SAC was Strategic Air Command. You bet. Yeah.
This has brought it home to me in a way that it never has.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
We went from there to college.
And Oklahoma City?
Well, at Shreveport.
Shreveport.
Yeah. Okay. Shreveport, Oklahoma City. Yeah. Stillwater. Excuse me. Stillwater. 2 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And there, my son severed the thumb to his right hand in an accident. He was 5.
What was the name of the third child that you had?
It was Kevin.
Kevin.
It was Wendy. It was the oldest boy.
Okay, Wendell.
Becky was 9. Let's see, Becky is 3 years older than Wendell. Becky's 60 now, and Wendell's 57 and Kevin's 55. I think that's the way it goes. But and then we ended up at Walter Reed years later, and they did a transplant on this child when he was 9. I spent quite a bit of time at Walter Reed while the Vietnam War was on. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
To watch it was.
How did he sever his thumb?
I had a washer-dryer combination. And I don't think they make it. Well, I don't know whether, but it had a big outlet pipe about this big, and it was metal. And there was kind of a corrugated thing that went down and went to the wall, and the air went out that way. And the corrugated thing, you put some screws on it and put it over that metal pipe. And for some reason, that wasn't on there. And he was showing his sister how a jet airplane goes. He put a little bullet that had a hole in it in that pipe to have the air blow it back out. And we measured. He had to have gotten his arm all the way up to the shoulder because he got it in the fan blade. It was drying. I never could understand it because children don't do hot. And it had to have been hot. We never did understand what happened. But at Walter Reed, they severed it. It severed it. Yeah, I was, my mother was a nurse and very stoic. I was raised that way. And I remember looking at the bones, the white bones, and I've got him in the bathroom trying to stop this thing, and this bleeding, and Ronald's getting the car ready, and we ran for the hospital, and I thought I was going to throw up, and then just like my mother slammed through my head, no, you will not, and I didn't. We got to the hospital, and they wouldn't even give him anything because we'd only been there a week, and I had to give him a doctor's name. I was a military fan. We didn't. So for some reason, I remembered the name of the doctor who had just done Becky had to have a school check with the doctor. And I remembered his name. They called him, and he told them to give him morphine. They put his thumb on ice, and we went racing off to Oklahoma City. We were in the hospital there for a while. Wendell and I. Ronald had to go back because he was in finals. That's kind of classic. My world was doing this, and he could get me there, and then he would go back because he had stuff he had to do.
Yeah.
So we were there a week. It was really interesting because I started crying. I didn't cry during the accident. I didn't cry. I got there, and then tears started pouring. They just poured. I couldn't stop them. I wasn't crying. I was just tears running down my face for about 3 days. And I'd talk to people, and I'd apologize, and I'd say, I'm sorry, I can't stop them, I'd laugh at jokes, and the parents were allowed to sit up and be there. They let us sleep on coffee tables and chairs, and they didn't care. It was okay. So these parents gathered all night in the lounge, and we had one parent told jokes, and it was interesting, but we got over that. Let's see, we went from Stillwater to...
There's a lot of, did you find, it just strikes me hearing you talk about this, the amount of this experience that you went through on your own, and if there was a loneliness there or a sense of isolation, or it was you were just...
No, because Ronald was not gone a year. He was gone, when we were in Vietnam, for instance, he was gone 15 days, and he'd come home, and then it was 5 days at the base. Now, we're living way up island.
Yeah.
But still... He was here all the time.
Yeah.
And he would call. He was very good at phone calling. He's kind of addicted to a telephone. And, And for me, it was an adventure. And I was expected, I was trying really hard to do well all the time because I adored my husband.
Yeah.
And I was trying to be the best Air Force wife I could be. And
that pressure to be a good Air Force wife is something else, right?
Yeah, but it was internal.
Yeah.
It wasn't, there wasn't any pressure outside.
Understood.
Yeah, it wasn't at all.
Yeah.
It was really, You know, and I watched the women around me. When I had Kevin in Shreveport right before we went to Newfoundland, I had the other two in Big Spring, and Ronald wasn't there. First baby, he had to be called and told he had a child the next day when they found me sobbing in bed because my husband had showed up. The next one, they would allow him to be in the hospital, but he wasn't there. Mm-hmm. So I wanted my husband to be there, and I made a big fuss about it and got the base to okay a civilian hospital instead of the base hospital. And I wanted to make sure he was there. Well, Kevin came 3 weeks early. Ronald wasn't even in the country. He was in Labrador.
Go figure. Huh?
Yeah. So I ended up with a midwife association. I, called a neighbor. I'm living off base, and I called a neighbor and said, "Oh my God, I think my water broke. What am I supposed to do?" And she read her Dr. Spock and said, "Oh my God, we got to get you to the hospital." And we had children. She didn't. Her husband was at the same place mine was, and so she called a neighbor, and that neighbor called a neighbor, and we switched all these people, and they got over to my place, and they walked behind me with mops and while I tried to pack everything, and I had children, and somebody stayed with the kids. I got to the hospital, and of course, had the baby immediately, and Ann Bratcher drove me. She was my neighbor across the street. She said it was a wonderful experience for her, because she was in the lounge waiting for me to have a baby. I had Kevin pretty quick. And she said the doctor came back down and said, "Father Dudley, you've got a little boy." And Ann said she stood up and she jumped up and down and hollered. And she said, "I'm the daddy, I'm the daddy." And the guys that were there all gave her cigars, honorary cigars and stuff. She had a grand time. And Ronald got home the next day.
Wow.
So it was okay. So.
After Oklahoma City, where did you? Oh, sorry, Stillwater.
It would have been Newfoundland to Stillwater to college, and then he went into. We went to Hampton, Virginia, and he was in some kind of a test. I've forgotten what I think a missile test of some sort. I guess with the college degree. I'm not sure how.
Yeah.
He's still flying, but he was in some sort of missile test, and we were guaranteed 4 years. Assignment. We were there 9 months, and he got assigned to Vietnam. They changed and sent us to.
And that would have been 1966, around there, 65, 66,
I have a
67.
date, so I'm not good with dates.
No, I'm just,
yeah. But we were there 66 to 69. We were in Okinawa.
Wow.
But Ronald had to be retrained. He was in C-130s, a transport airplane, and he had to go to school. We had a house. I had to sell the house and move the kids and I, to Florida to my parents. They lived in a trailer park, and Wendell was supposed to have his second and third operation in Walter Reed. They'd done the first one, and they did a fourth finger transplant. They took this finger, took everything out here, closed it so these two knuckles set together with a little tiny white scar here. Took the finger, pulled it out here. Operation number 1. Operation number 2, they cut off this joint, took the fingernail, transplanted it down here, and it grows. And then operation number 3, they padded it, because the doctor said that he'd done this to the guy. Doing guys, he'd never done a child. He was really excited. We were a special patient there, and he said. The guys they didn't like the way it looked. They'd stick it in their pockets, and they wouldn't use it. So to him, it was a failure. So that's why they did the padding, whatever. And while I was in Florida, I left the kids, the other two, with Mom and Dad. And Wendell and I went back to Walter Reed, and we were there probably a couple of weeks. Yeah, another adventure. It was another long story.
You said that was interesting about the guys who were during Vietnam at Walter Reed.
Yeah, the hospital's full of them, and a lot of women too. At this point in time, they're women, but mostly guys. Yeah. It was, and Walter Reed was like several hospitals. I'm not quite sure how the compound worked, but it had tunnels under the ground from one to the other. And I was taking Wendell to a movie, I had him in a wheelchair, and we were going to go to the movie. And I'm walking through one of those tunnels, and I kept looking at a guy walking down there, and he was in his pajamas and a little robe. And I couldn't tell how old he was. He kind of looked funny. And I kept looking at him, and he came over, and he said, let me push. He wanted to push the wheelchair. So he pushed the wheelchair, and I said, have you been here very long? And he looked at me for a minute, and he said, 2 years. I said, 2 years? I said, why? And he looked at me for a minute and kind of smirked, and he said, well, I landed a helicopter upside down in Vietnam and broke every bone in my body.
Ugh.
Yeah. But anyway, he took us down there. We got to the movie. He put us in the back where the wheelchairs go, and he went up front where all the patients are. And it was, oh, God. Oh, it was one of those rock stars that became so important. Anyway, he was playing some sort of a Arab sheik or something and crawling under tents and singing. And the guys were talking back to the theater. They were making personal comments. They had such a raucous going on. They were having such fun. It was just extraordinary, you know, and there was just pieces of them left. But they were all there, and it was an amazing evening. You know?
Yeah.
I had moments of being so proud of the military. I'm just beside myself. Yeah.
That was one of them?
That was one of them. Another one was the trip over to Okinawa. Ronald was there, had to build a house to get me there. And finally, we could go. And I got on an airplane from Florida to Seattle, and then we were going over Anchorage to Tokyo, and then into Okinawa. And I got to Seattle, and it was civilian aircraft. It was major aircraft, but mostly military people on it. And I saw this young woman sitting on her suitcase at the airport, and she had a baby in her arms. And I kind of went over and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And I said, "My name's Sue, and are you by any chance going to Okinawa?" And she started to cry, and she just sobbed on my shoulder. And I kept thinking, every time I feel like I've had it, I learned that I have not.
Yeah.
And she was an orphan, been put on the airplane, married a young man in the Marines, had been put on an airplane someplace in the East by her father-in-law. Never been on an airplane before with the baby. And her father-in-law said, "Don't worry about it, people will help you." And she'd said she'd sat in Chicago and cried, and nobody spoke to her. And I was the first one who spoke to her. And we ended up having a wonderful trip. The airplane was full of these Navy and Marines and Army and Air Force, various ranks, just people going, most of them going to Okinawa. And we had a dentist that was a lieutenant colonel. He had the most rank, and he kind of pulled rank on everybody. And they took care of us. The Marines, changed diapers. They were 18 years old. They were kids going. And the Army, played with the boys, and they got their battle ribbons, and they threw things in the air, and they diapered the baby, and it was just, we had an extraordinary trip. A long, just awesome experience with these people just taking care of us. We were the only two females, and I had the three little kids that were running around like fleas, and she had the baby in her arms, and they took care of us, took care of our children.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What do you remember about Japan? Is this like, were you on base in Japan? Or?
No, we were in the Tokyo Hilton for the night. Yeah, and it was
a cultural shift, contextual shift?
Yeah, it was. But we just spent the night there. The next day we're getting on another airplane for Okinawa. Of course, that's where I'm going to get there. As a matter of fact, this is a hoot, because Ronald had come. He had shown up Christmas at the trailer park, and I was crying Christmas Eve, and he walks in the door. And they had to send a plane to the United States to get it repaired someplace in Carolina. He had been the pilot. He had flown the plane in, come down, hadn't said a word, and gotten down to me, and he had 2 weeks. to where they had to do the maintenance and get back to the airplane. And he got back and got on the airplane, and it broke down every place he went. In fact, I found out that he was actually in the air base in Tokyo while I was in the Tokyo Hilton. And he got back to Okinawa 2 hours after we did. We just, when our plane came in, we old friends were there jumping up and down and hollering, and we waited and went up to see our house that he had built, and it didn't even have a roof on it. So we lived in places all over the island for like 6 weeks. And of course, they shipped him off to Vietnam. And Tom was
Tell me about Okinawa in those years.
I loved it. I loved Okinawa. I tell people I cried for a year when I came back to the United States. That's not true, but it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And we were there 66 to 69. They gave it back, I think, in 72. So the politics there was some political stuff going on. The guys were flying in Vietnam. It was, we heard stories, but we didn't lose any airplanes.
Yeah.
They were doing transport. I remember one of the guys telling me that he was so excited that he was going to be, he was young, doing transport, and he was going to get his first airplane that he had, a load that he took into Vietnam was a load of Kotex for the nurses. But Ronald had, I didn't hear the stories. They didn't tell bad stories. And I think that's more or less true of the military. You will hear them later, but while they're happening, you don't hear them. And he did call me one night. Ronald likes the telephone. He was in Vietnam on the runway at night, and they'd had a crash, and they had to get an airplane off. And they had a couple of planes tried, and they hadn't gotten it. And he was doing the C-130. And he was hooked up to this airplane, and he was going to try to pull it off the thing. And he had power to connect into the phone system so he could talk to me on the telephone while he did this. And I lay in bed in Okinawa and listened to this crazy business going on there. And he got it done. And, that was it. He didn't even say goodbye. He just hung up. But he wanted somebody he knew to be there while that was going on.
Wow.
But they had lots of adventures. A friend and I were sitting on the steps one lovely Okinawa evening. I was on base. It's 18 months up island, and then we got moved on base. And we were on base, and it was gorgeous. And the moon was out, and we were up on a hill, and runway was down below us, and the lights were on. It was just gorgeous. And sirens went off. And all over the base. And the military police came through, and their cars, and they had the loudspeaker system going. And there was a battle going on in Vietnam, and they were going to be out of blood in 2 hours. So everybody there who could, we had young children, we couldn't, but everybody there got into the buses, and they took them up to Kadena and took blood, and it went right straight. And it was Khe Sanh, and battle, and Ronald was flying in it. And about, I guess it was 4 or 5 years later, I heard the story where we were at a bar, and a whole bunch of old friends were there, and they got to drink, and they started telling stories. And he talked about that battle, and he said he didn't even turn his motors off. He just hit the runways. It was the Marines, and what he did was carry like trucks and stuff, and they'd drop it out the end.
Yeah.
And he said, and the Marines would hit. He said they would be out of ammunition as he was landing, and they would load that. They would hop that plane and get in there, and they'd get everything off of it, and they'd bring their dead. So, and he said he'd just keep going, and then he'd take right back off at the end of it. They didn't even stop, and then another one would be right behind him. And it was a famous battle.
Yeah.
But it was really. Said finally, after so many days, they took him off flight status because he couldn't sleep. And he said it was the smell of the dead.
Wow.
That he couldn't sleep. Yeah. So, But mostly we heard the good stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of them he told was he was transporting people. That's what he did a lot. And they had rules because it's great big C-1, the huge cargo plane, and he had a bunch of Koreans on it. And they decided they wanted some tea, and they built fires in the back of the airplane to have their tea. So I had to send the engineer back there to stop them.
Yeah.
And they were hysterical. My God, they're building fires in the airplane. And they didn't do that, but they broke out their kimchi pots. And Ronald said the plane stunk of kimchi. They were like, and they did it on purpose. And then one time he was picking up some guys, and they were waiting. He saw them waiting out there, and said this kid was like 6'3" and blonde and dirty and had a big gun on his thing. He was a Marine, and he had a little puppy on a leash of some sort with him. And they weren't allowed on the airplane. And Ronald sent the co-pilot out to tell him that he couldn't get on the airplane. And the co-pilot came back in, and Ronald said, "Did you tell him?" And he said, "No." He said, "I didn't." He said, "I decided that if he wanted to get that puppy on that airplane, he could get the puppy on the airplane." And they decided that with the gun and the dirty Marine, and he took his puppy on the airplane.
It's kind of moments of humanity in this like completely inhumane context, right?
And I can't remember. It was like somebody big muck in U.S. government was on the TV. Our TV was only Okinawan. It was a hoot. Most of it's in Japanese, but sometimes you'd hear American. And it was some ambassador or something, and he was saying that we didn't fly in Cambodia, and this type of thing. And I remember Ronald sitting there like, "Hell, we don't. I've been there," And so they had, they flew blind bat out of Khe Sanh, and it wasn't Khe Sanh. I can't remember the name of it, but the squadron was 17 days in island, 5 days on Naha, Okinawa, and then back and forth. And then 3 months out of the year, they went to this place in Cambodia. I'm getting that wrong. Anyway, and they flew blind bat.
What does that mean, blind bat?
Well, it was an unmarked black airplane.
Oh, yeah.
And, I don't know what they were doing. It was big top secret. But every year, they would spend 3 months there.
Wow.
And I have some interesting pieces of jewelry, stones that Ronald won in poker games from that experience. So,
wow.
Yeah, but that's what they did.
When you were in Okinawa, was the community there that you were sort of around? It was predominantly wives and American kind of military, or did you get to sort of spend time?
Up Island. We had a group of Okinawan teenage girls who found us, and they had made this. We were Kakazu Ridge. That's where they came in, and that's where we built our house. And I had up at the top of the ridge, and the road went down, and these little concrete houses are down here, and mine's the very last one on the ridge. In fact, I had to, the first time it rained real hard, it floods down that hill, and it all came to me. And it came in one door, and I opened the other door, and went out the other door, and went right down the hill. I had a little porch built on it, because if you opened the front door, you would have dropped right down into there was no porch, there was nothing there. It was just right. So I had this little tiny porch there because of the earthquakes. And we had earthquakes constantly, little bitty ones. And it was, they were trying to put up telephone poles. That's a big deal. We didn't have telephone. And the guys needed it because they're called out all the time. And when they were there, and they putting up the telephone poles, and they put them up, and we're all watching, and then they put lines like this. There's like 3 little all the Okinawan workmen wore blue. And then they got down to my house, and I had a maid there, Suka, and she said, they talked to her, very excited. And she came over and she said, "Okasan, they want us to help pull." And I thought, you got to be kidding me. So we kind of looked at it, and she went over and grabbed the young man guy on the waist and looked at me, and I thought, okay. So I went over and grabbed her, and we all lined up, started to pull on this. It was crazy. I mean, it was like way down the hill. And everybody else is watching. I mean, all the wives have come out in all the little houses, and we had a couple of Japanese, but mostly Navy, Marine, whatever wives. And so they all came down, and it was like a conga line. We got the phone lines up. We pulled them up.
Amazing.
It worked. Yeah, it was a hoot. Yeah, it was just, you never knew what was going to happen. Every day was an adventure in Okinawa.
Yeah. And you said the kids loved it.
Yeah, the kids loved it. And these teenage girls found us because the guys were gone all the time. And I had this one young girl that came quite often to my house. And I found out later on that she lived way up north, at the north of the island, and she would hitchhike. And they would come down, and they wanted to speak English. They were working on it. That's what they wanted to do. And they were curious. And if our husbands were there, they'd go stay with another wife because there were so many of us on this hill on the Kakaza Ridge. And one time, this young woman showed up in my house, and I can't remember her name now. But she said, Okusan. She hit Fatima, with the Marine base. That's what we were by. That was the pool we used when the children want to go swimming. And she said, Okusan, she said, I came through town, Fatima, this little tiny village there. And she said there were young men marching in the street and singing. And I asked someone who they were, and they told me that they were Marines from base there. And I said, what are they? And they said, well, they're going to go to war. They'll be sent to Vietnam. That's where they go. And she said, Okusan, I asked, how old are they? And the man told me they're 18. And she said, Okusan. And I said, yes, they're 18. And she cried and I cried. Yeah. Because the Marines were
children.
They were kids. And most of them that I knew were 18. Of course, I met some of the wives.
Yeah.
And some of the women. But yeah.
It still strikes me now when I see like, guys in their uniforms in airports, and you kind of look at them and they're pimply foreheads.
Yeah, some of them are so young. That I don't know. Another interesting story about that, a different one. The women had gotten together. The squadron commander's wife called us in, and she said, we've got some problems. We've got the old heads are doing fine, but the new kids are having trouble, and let's do something. So we started being careful and paying attention and watching, but we had new ones coming on base all the time. And so we decided that we would meet them when they came in at the base, and help them get settled, tell them about the island, tell them about working with the Japanese people and this type of thing, and just help. And so we made a list, and we took so many. And one of my friends was going to be in the States when one of her gals came in, so she asked me if I would do it, and I said yeah. So I met the airplane, and there were 2 young children and a very young mother, and I got her settled, and we helped them get the kids in school. That was the big thing. And the husband's, of course, going 17 days in and 5 days back and forth. And she was having some problems, and she was scared. We had Steely boys there, and that was just a part of our life. And I had taken my Schnauzer. I had shipped him out, and he didn't like the Okinawans, males. Females were fine, didn't like the males. So he barked. I never had a problem with the Steely boy. And I told her, why don't you get a dog? Because she was very uptight about this. And she didn't. And then I got a phone call from the base. And they asked me if I would go over and take care of the children. They had found her dead that morning. Husband was in Vietnam. And I went over, to the kids, and I was left there and it was a mess. There was I could tell she was having some sort of real serious problems. I don't know. They just found her dead. She had called the base and had been scared. They had sent some MPs out and said they didn't find anything. They had left. They had called back later to see how she was doing. And one of the children answered the telephone, and they said, "Mommy's asleep. She won't wake up." So they sent the police back out, and she was dead. But I'm still there trying to keep everything, and her husband comes back from Vietnam. And I will never, we had maybe 3 or 4 people there, most women. And that man is sitting on the couch, and they had just given him some letters that had gone in, and he hadn't picked, and they had just caught up with him. One was a letter from his wife, and he read it out loud. He sat there on that couch and sobbed and read that letter, and she was scared. She was scared of the Okinawans. She was scared, she was scared. And we all sat there just stunned, like, is it possible that somebody can actually die of fear? I don't know. But it was a very, very strange experience.
You were saying earlier on that when you're in Newfoundland, it takes a very particular kind of person to live the life with, I don't know, grace and conviction and.
I think you need kind of a sense of adventure.
Yeah.
Where that part of it's fun. Yeah, and I don't know. Then down at the bottom of that hill, that house we had, in the rainstorms, I built the little porch and stuff. I finally decided, the first time I got hit, I ended up shoveling mud out of the place. And, of course, Ronald's gone. And the second time I got hit, it was really bad, but I had gotten an air conditioner. Somebody had been leaving the island and had an air conditioner for sale, and I bought it.
One of those
little window units, and put it in the window. And the guy who brought it happened to be bringing it the day after. I'm walking around in the mud in my house, and he said, "Oh my God," he said, and he started walking around looking at everything. He said, "Oh my God, I've never seen anything like this." He said, "What can I do? Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, the air conditioner will help because of mold and other problems." And he said, "Oh my God," he said, "My wife just went back to the States. She can't handle Okinawa." And he said, "She's never seen anything like this." I told Ronald I wasn't going to see it again either. And we built a canal system on the side of the house. We covered it with concrete, and we had this little canal that poured off on each side of the porch. It worked. I never had another flood.
You were there at 66 or 69?
69.
69. Yeah. And then where to?
Then we went, we had 90 inches of rain the last 3 months we were in Okinawa, and we went to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico.
Dry as a bone.
Yeah, it was right off the White Sands National Monument. It was something. The base had to put humidifiers in our house because we were having nosebleeds. The kids and I. Ronald didn't have a problem. Ronald had flown all over the world all the time, so he didn't have the problem. But we'd acclimated to that humidity, and without it, we just every night every morning woke up, our pillows were covered in blood. It took about 6 months for us to get used to it.
Wow.
We were there 2 years, and then he was in a test group there, which was funny because they were the only group in the Air Force who had tanks. They had Army tanks because they were testing missiles or something.
Okay.
And so they had tanks. And Ronald took the boys out in the desert and let them ride in his tank, one of his tanks. And they got so excited they found some ribbons, some military ribbons in the tank, and they decided it was a German tank. And these boys are fairly young, they're excited. And I thought we were going to split because the year before that, at one of the big military functions, our squadron hotshot, you always have a couple of them, and who drank a lot, had gotten one of those tanks and had driven it up the steps of the officers' club. Ronald figured those ribbons were off his uniform. They was still in the tank, but they had, and then we went to Dayton,
Uh-huh.
Next thing was Dayton.
Dayton, Ohio, is
Dayton,
there?
Ohio. And it was there I had a problem. I had a medical problem, and I ended up at the hospital. And they found out that I didn't have enough sun. No, I wasn't getting enough sun. They put sun lamps in our house where I read and in the kitchen. And I've read in the newspaper that Dayton, Ohio, that month of December had 12 hours of sunshine. And I'd come in from New Mexico and Okinawa and stuff, and my body just said,
vitamin deficiency, whatever it was.
Yeah, whatever it was. Yeah, I got over that.
How did the kids handle? I mean, they're going from school to school to school at this stage, right?
When they were younger, they would have complained about it and found it difficult. As adults, they wouldn't trade anything for it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't, That's why Kevin's in Japan now, because his memory of that. Becky wouldn't trade it for anything. We were in Okinawa. Of course, Ronald's gone, and I'm getting the kids in school. And the school where they went was used to be a barracks. It was just board buildings, low one-floor things. And it was a hospital during the war or something. I don't know what the story was, but just this dumb place. Our teachers were wonderful. They were all kids. They were in it for the adventure. They loved to teach. They could do anything. And I was out there one day. I went out one day to help, and I walked into the classroom. We'd had rains, and it flooded. Every time they had rains, it flooded. And all the kids were sitting on the back of they had the little desk with the little thing and the chair. They were sitting up on the chair. The teacher was sitting cross-legged on her desk, and she was reading a story to them.
Oh, wow.
And the water was about this deep, and I just kicked off my shoes and I walked around. Nobody said go home. Nobody said, they just didn't do that. And Wendell's class had a Roman orgy in class.
As you do.
And the teacher had gotten, they had done all this planning. The teacher had taken all the furniture out of the room and had gotten mattresses from the base and put the mattresses out. And they had the little girls in their little skirts, and they had a little group playing some stringed instrument over the side, and all the mothers had brought in trays of food. And they had grape juice. They fed them.
For wine, yeah.
And I'm out worried. This young man is out there, and he's throwing up, and he's vomiting. And I go out to help him. Oh, my God, what can I do? And he looked at me absolutely disgusted. He said, you don't do anything. He said, this is what they do. And then he went right back in and sat down and ate some more. And he said, that's what they do in Rome.
He ate till he vomited, and that was
and then you go.
verisimilitude.
Yeah. But the teachers were, I was in awe of the teachers.
And it just strikes me that there's a real sort of like can-do-itness. Like, if you can,
Yeah.
How long were you in Dayton for?
2 years. And then that's where he retired. Yeah. Yeah. He retired from Dayton, and he was again at, and I started back school in Dayton at Wright State. And then we were coming to Florida. It was a big deal. And we were so excited. And Ronald got a job with Lear Sigler and ended up in someplace out west for 3 months. And then in L.A., in Los Angeles. And it was my job again. I had to get us out of there and get us moved and get the stuff shipped, and took the family to Florida and stayed there for a while. And then the kids and I drove out to L.A.
Was it?
And we were civilians.
You were civilians, and that's a different world, right?
Yeah.
Was that an adjustment? Was that adjustment hard?
No.
No?
No. No, it was...
Same spirit?
Same. It wasn't quite as interesting for me, but I was visiting my parents in Florida and found a house. I didn't have anything to do, and Inglewood, and I found this house on the water that looked, their trailer was right north of the Minnesota Key Bridge, and this house sat right south of it. And I just walked in one door and out the other. And the real estate agent said, nobody's ever going to buy this house. It smelled bad. And I got to Ronald that night, and I said, Ronald, I don't care what we do. And I said, I don't know anything about the house. I walked in, out one door and out the other, and I want the view.
Mm-hmm.
So we bought it, and in about 6 weeks, we were there. He
Wow.
bailed out of Blair Sigler. I found out later on he really hated it, and we were in Florida.
In Florida, and that been here since?
Yep.
Yeah.
Been here since, yeah.
You said it was a little less interesting. I'm thinking about the moves, for example. When you move in the military, a lot of the logistics of it are taken care of, right? Or is that not true?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. When we went to Newfoundland, I wasn't able to go until we got that house. We got that half of a Quonset hut. Somebody got us this thing, and so we didn't know I was going. I was at Mother and Dad's, thinking I wasn't going to get to go because Ronald had to go, and so that came, and he got orders for me to go. And what he did is he moved us out of the house in Shreveport, and he took. He would pick me up Flat River. I lived in Missouri. My parents were. So he did. We got to Newfoundland. We got in our little Quonset hut, and he called. You call in and let them know you're there, and then they arrange your timing to go in the hole, they called it, sack. And he called, and they said instantly. So he wasn't there at all. I mean, he went right directly on base, and I'm sitting there. I've got furniture coming in.
Yeah.
I've been there like 24 hours. I don't know anything about the place. And the engineer's wife, they were already there. And she came to help me, God bless her. And the movers came.
Mm-hmm.
And the base is there to inventory. That's what they do. And they came in, I mean, the chairs came in without arms. The bookcases came in a pile of lumber with nails sticking up in it. The washer-dryer combination, which this is before Wendell lost his thumb in it, I shipped it up. It came in with an empty box of fab in it. And the base got there, and the books came in. Somebody had played tiddlywinks with the books. Well, Ronald had said when he got there, he said, when I got home from Shreveport, he wasn't there because he was on base, and they moved us.
Yeah.
We had garbage. They just took the garbage and put it in a package and shipped it up. And what they did, he said, my liquor disappeared. He had bottles of liquor. And obviously they drank it, is what happened.
While
they
they
all
were
got
packing,
drunk.
clearly.
There wasn't a single inventory on any item that was there. Nothing. And the base said, we can't inventory it. We can't do anything. So they blacklisted the movers, they blacklisted everything, but they left me.
Piles of trash.
Whatever. And the only thing that made it without a problem, I had a piano, and that piano came in without a scratch when they brought it into this place. And the washer dryer's there, and we opened the door, and somebody laughed and said, an empty box of fab. Well, they hooked it up, and by this time, the engineer's wife had said, oh my God. So she had gone out to get help, and she got 2 electricians to come back with her, Newfoundlanders. And they raw wired. They don't do anything normal. And they cut all the wires, and they raw wired this big 3-prong thing, which they can't use, into the wall. So it's set there, raw wired, and they let that. And they ran the water in it to make sure everything was all right. Well, the fab box had been full of soap when it got shipped. It was all in the washer dryer. And 32 cycles after that, the timer broke. And it was still, every time you opened the door, it was a wall of suds. Nothing would come out, And by this time, we were the second row of Quonset huts. And the one in front of us had a gal that worked for the military some way. They were not military family. They worked there. And Yanni played the piano. And everybody's gathered. Everybody gathers. Me, you got a bunch. And Yanni came over to help. And so by this time, the other end of the Quonset hut, this guy was a heavy drinker. And I didn't drink much. I didn't know much about this type of thing. And he kept bringing Heineken beers from Newfoundland, which evidently is much higher in alcohol than you get in the United States.
Really?
They were like they'd be in Germany. And he'd bring them over. He'd divvy them out. Then he'd go back and he'd bring them over and divvy them out. Well, they had a party going. And I think I had 1 or 2 beers, and we had a wonderful time. We played duets, Johnny and I.
Uh-huh.
And we had our beers. The kids had all these people in there. They had all this stuff going on. The guys finally decided when it quit, they got a tarp. And they put the tarp down and held it up like this under the front of the big washer dryer, opened it up, got a hose from outside, took a hose in and hosed it out. And soap went out, and the tarp went out the little kitchen, down the little steps. And, well, all the neighborhood kids got out there because they were throwing soap. It was just like a mound of snow outside. They were all having, I think about 11:30, they got the first clear water through the washer dryer.
Wow.
They had a party. It was grand. And okay, so I'm thinking the bill, oh, geez. I mean, they're there from like 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 11 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
2 electricians, you know. Oh, I never got a bill. I never got one. The guys that came to light the furnace in this little Quonset hut walked in, and he looked at that piano, and he looked at that washer dryer, and he looked at me, and he said, "Oh, you're the crazy American who plays the piano." He said, "That was some party you had. They're still telling stories about it." You know? Never
The
got a
mountains
bill.
of suds.
Yeah, they had a party, and that's all it took.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Looking back, so when Ronald got out and you retired out, did he have any kind of adjustment?
Yeah. Everybody we knew that retired had a terrible time adjusting.
Yeah.
They had classes that they could go to. And they'd try to get them not to wear those shoes as civilians, you know, because they all had those black shoes. It was a difficult adjustment for most everybody. He had 20 years. He tried the whole time to get to be regular. Then he wanted the 30 years. Ronald loved the military.
Yeah.
He truly, truly loved it.
Why did he get out?
You had to be made a regular or something, and
Okay.
I've forgotten what his status. I'm not.
Okay, gotcha.
He didn't hold the status that
But he was
he did
required to go for
retire,
30.
and he did get retirement and all that kind of stuff, but he didn't. He wasn't able to stay the last 10 years.
Yeah, and he loved it, and so it
Oh,
was.
he loved it. You know, of course he did. I mean, he lived an extraordinary life.
Yeah.
You know, they got Big Spring, Texas. They took students to their bar mitzvahs in New York and celebrated. You know, they just hopped an airplane, and he had airplanes. A lot of those airplanes he considered more or less his.
Yeah.
And they lived in this world where it was just extraordinary.
So when he retired, his world kind of shrunk.
It shrunk. He had a very difficult time. Yeah.
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 And did you have a hard time too? When you said it got a little more boring for you, a little less adventurous.
No,
but-
I went back to school. Oh,
Okay.
I had been at Missouri U in that summer, and then I quit. You know, that was it, because I was going to get married. And in Dayton, I ended up at Wright State. A friend talked me into taking some classes with her, and they were classes in geography, which I could care less about, and I loved them. And it was climate change, and it was plates. They talked about plates and stuff, and I never heard that. I fell in love with it. So in California, he was gone as much as he was in the military, but it was over there. He had like a $20,000 entertainment allowance. And all these guys would come, most of them military. They made missiles, Bear Sigler did. And they'd come, and Ronald would have to take them in. He'd come home from, I don't know how long it took him to drive from Santa Monica to where we lived in the valley. But, he would come home just exhausted, and he'd been at this glorious place. He'd talk about the movie stars that sat next to him and all this, he lived in this world. It was, and they'd go to the bars, and the guys, that's what they wanted to do. It was, so the kids and I managed, and the kids were a little bit older, and they were beginning to fight, and I always went to the shower to cry. That was my place. When I had it, I needed privacy. I'd go in the shower, be okay. I'd come out, And I decided to hell with this, and I found Pierce Junior College there. So I started taking classes at Pierce Junior College. And then when we were there the 2 years, and then we came to Florida, and I went to Manatee Community College. I like to go to school. And then I ended up being a county commissioner in Charlotte County, environmentalist. That's quite often. I was the second woman. They'd had a woman in 1974, and I was in 1992, which was kind of that year of the woman, thing. And I was the second female they had, and the only Democrat. I'm a Democrat. Everybody else, was like, but, and then Ronald left about that period of time, and I thought, I can sit here in Inglewood, or I could get that degree I always wanted. So I sold everything and moved to Gainesville.
Wow.
And went to Santa Fe and went to UF and graduated in '03 at the age of 68 with a degree in environmental science.
That's amazing. So in a strange kind of way, your world kind of expanded in another direction.
Yeah. I love Gainesville. I've stayed. Yeah, I don't have to stay. I can move. I can move in 24 hours. I don't put down solid roots, and I never did. I don't know why. It may be a personality thing.
And that may be the thing that made you such a good fit for the lifestyle, right?
I can move very easily. I can live any place I want to. I just prefer to live. I like Gainesville.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's special.
Why is it special?
Oh boy, you guys, you don't have any idea how special it is. For one thing, it's fairly liberal. It's different. A conversation here is different than you're going to have any other place in Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because it's a college town.
Yeah. I actually, you guys, and this is probably shouldn't say this on computer, but as a county commissioner, I actually got some of those telephone calls that you read about in books. The Sarasota Committee of 100 tried to get me to stop an environmental group I had going in Charlotte County, and I thought, and Ronald was chairman of the water board, and he got a phone call and was told to do blah blah blah, and was like, holy cow,
yeah, it's real.
It's real. Yeah, it was interesting.
So, looking back, and in so many ways you've spoken to this already, but it's always nice to have language.
Sure.
Looking back over those 21 years? 20 years? How do you think it shaped the person? Because you talk about it when you first arrived, you were this naive young woman who, to the person who steps out and sort of builds this, how did it change you? How did it shape you those years?
Oh, it gave me a chance. It exposed me. I'm a book person. I'm a volunteer at Friends of the Library. This is my passion here right now. But I'm a reader, always was, and I read about it in books. It never occurred to me I'd have a chance to experience some of it, see some of these places, and meet some of these people, and I met them. Very normal, everyday people ended up being extraordinary over and over again. And it was just, I just loved it. I truly loved it. And by the way, I won't go back to Okinawa.
You would? Why not?
Well, because it's now, the bays are polluted, and the high-rise hotels are on the, it's not that absolutely charming, exquisite, wonderful. We could get our hair done for, I think, like 75 cents. I live in Up Island, and they, as long as you didn't take a child with you, the Okinawans loved children. And if you made the mistake of taking a child with you, you sat there with soap in your hair and stuff. They played with the kid. There wasn't anything you could do about it. We took scuba classes there, and I got to see that reef. I don't scuba. I snorkel because I scared myself. But the first time I went in that water and saw that reef, it's beautiful beyond belief. And the colors and going down the cliff and the colored fish around you, and then as you get deeper, it starts to blue out. and I quit scuba, but I snorkel passionately. And I spent one afternoon I like shells. I've quit collecting them because I'm an environmentalist, and I feel bad about that now, so I don't collect them. But this conch, and it was one of the big fancy conchs. They had the high prongs coming up the side like this.
The waves.
Yeah. And I'm laying in water probably this deep on top of that conch, just quietly, just barely moving a flipper occasionally. And it's pink and stuff, and the animal is green with kind of white spots in it, and the shell is riding on top of this animal here, and the head's out here, and the head has two eyes on long thing, and the eyeballs are on the end, and it's kind of waving to some kind of music, and I'm on top of it and just following it quietly over the sand,
I've snorkeled once in my life in Costa Rica, and it was just the most amazing thing.
Yeah, I used to think that's where I'd like to die.
Is over a reef somewhere?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to pollute it, but
you're biodegradable, I'm certain. Or your biodegradable flippers, and you'll be fine.
But it was, I just had, it was a gift to me. My life, my military, being a military wife was a gift to me.
What should civilians know about the military and about military families too? What should they recognize?
I don't know. I think maybe the thing that was powerful to me was that almost what I call sometimes that sisterhood. I saw those women react to things, and over and over and over again, I was just in awe. When I had Kevin, that child I had with Ronald out of country this time, the next morning, the squadron commander's wife walked into my room. I'd never met her. I was a little young dodo, and she had a major's wife with her that I knew, because every time I was around the major's wife, she ended up hollering at me, because my father had trained me to be very polite. And the major's wife was, as far as I'm concerned, older. And every time she walked into a room, I stood up. She finally just hollered at me, and she said, "Damn it, don't do that. You make me feel so old." So I quit doing that. But the squadron commander's wife said, "What do you want me to do? Do you want me to move into your house, or do you want me to take your children into mine?" And I wouldn't have dreamed of taking her up on this, and I didn't. I managed it. But her saying it was a gift. And I've never forgotten that support that goes into place. And over and over and over again, I saw that, among just in conversation with somebody. The women coped with, lived in a different world.
And do you think that that's very particular to the military, that kind of
I saw it a lot as overseas. You run into it clearer overseas. And I had a conversation with somebody who was moving to Israel. My neighbor was moving to Israel when I lived in L.A. Her husband wanted to go there to work on the atomic bomb. He was a nuclear physicist in the United States. And she attached herself to me because I had been different places and she hadn't.
Yeah.
And she was, it was an interesting experience. But they went there the summer before they actually did move. And she spent about 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month, and they kind of drove around Israel to see. They had 2 children, 2 girls. And she came back and she told me about it, about the people helping and the conversations,
Yeah.
And I said, it sounds like an overseas squadron.
Yeah. So it's that sense of, I guess, isolation in a foreign place.
Well, and help.
And help.
And help from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be the guy that's, I don't know, everybody participates in it. And you're not hitting any barrier. I mean, it's just there. It's free. But I thought that was interesting. I thought maybe it's because you're not actually a member of Okinawa. You are. I don't know. I never could quite figure it out.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it except in the military situation. But I haven't lived as an adult except in the military situation, really.
Yeah. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I was interested in, you were over there in Okinawa and Vietnam was happening, and there was a political side to Vietnam. And
There's a couple of them.
yeah, and I'm interested because you obviously a very aware person, but you didn't get a lot of the media from the States. And how was the conflict of the war and the protests?
That's an interesting question because we saw an odd side of it. I think we had the Air Force is more liberal than the other areas of service. I took me a while to understand that. I got told it repeatedly, but one of the reasons was SAC, because SAC had these very strange. I mean, these guys were like gone all the time and are in these holes or something, and the women were left, and they had so many divorces. They finally decided that the women had to be based as the airplane crew was, so that they could help each other, because their crew was always gone at the same time. So SAC broke down that rigid system, and the Air Force never had it. But I kept running into the Navy and to the Marines and stuff, and I'd think, and the Army, oh my God, it would have driven me crazy because I don't have that kind of personality.
Yeah.
But it was different, and the women I knew on Okinawa, they would have shot Nixon themselves if something had happened to them. We didn't lose an airplane over there. We lost airplanes on bases all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we got back to Mexico, we had such a bad time. They've lost so many airplanes. They had the guys take out insurance. They had experts come in to teach the women about the 5 stages of grief, and because they had 3 crashes, bang, 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 and the whole base was in a turmoil. So we didn't, but it was, and we had some airman friends. And we had airman friends. And we had some airman friends that thought that the FBI was checking their mail because they were against the war. Now, they were there. They were airmen on these airplanes, but they were young.
Yeah.
And they had come out of, someplace. And they had belonged to, and they passionately didn't believe in the war. In fact, I didn't know anybody who passionately did believe in the war.
Including yourself?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And did that change from when you were there to afterwards, looking back?
No, I feel even more stronger about it now than I did anything, because that was crazy. It was I have friends that go to Vietnam now. A bunch of people. I mean, I've been told not to go to Okinawa because they've been to Okinawa, and they say it'll break your heart. You don't want to see Okinawa. And they've been to Vietnam, and they've had dinner with somebody in their home, and they've thought, wow. And I don't know, And I had a friend recently who was in Phnom Penh for about 8 months. She was teaching English as a second language in the university there. And she loved Cambodia. She loves the Cambodians. She was, and you fall in love with the people. And I don't know. We were at it was a hoot. We were at they had a bunny club in Kadena. It was a takeoff on Neft and these bunny clubs. And the girls had the bunny costumes, and they had the little puffy things, and they were Okinawans. And the Okinawans don't come across as sex things, goddesses, because they think it's funny, and they don't pay that much attention to it. And we were at this place, and we were going to go in for the stage show and stuff, but we were having dinner and some drinks, and this Marine, very young, is sitting in the booth, kind of 3 booths behind us, and he is so drunk, And every time the little bunny girl goes by with her tray of drinks, he reaches for her tail, you know. And she says something to him, and finally he grabbed her tail and she took the tray and went, and kind of knocked him out a little bit. Everybody laughed. We all thought that was funny. But I don't know, you know, they just came and went, and we didn't see, I had no personal experience with the tragedy of it except Walter Reed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of fear for your husband?
No,
Did you worry about him on his missions? He just seemed so well trained and everything.
No, I just didn't. I didn't. That might have been a protective mechanism.
Yeah.
You know, and the other thing I ran into that I thought was really interesting, in coming back home after that, several places. In fact, I have about it in one of my stories. The women who had lost their husbands, when we were in Stillwater, my sorority was at the school there, and I contacted them and was helping. And I met another young woman who had a child, and her husband had been killed. Not in the war, as a matter of fact. His plane had crashed, and she was someplace in Texas or something like that. And she was back, and she said her family was there. And she said she was thinking seriously about moving back close to a base because the civilian world just couldn't empathize. And I saw that over and over and over again. They kind of like blocked it. If you were military, you were immediately put in a different category during that war. I think it was just that war. And they ran into something, and to have somebody to understand them, they had to move back, even with their husband dead, to that military family. And when I was to get in the airplane when I moved to Florida, and I had to get those operations for Wendell, and we were getting ready to go, someplace then. But I was arranging it at MacDill for transport to get to Walter Reed. And about I was talking to somebody, and there was a couple of desks, and there was a desk over here, and this young woman was obviously a wife whose husband was dead. And I was listening to the conversation, and she was talking about the telephone calls. Her husband was dead, and she was living at home, and she was getting ugly telephone calls. And we saw that a lot, and it happened. And, you know, I can remember waving at her and saying something across the room to her, because we immediately, you gather like this, and every time you got close to it. But it was a very difficult war for even the military to be in.
Oh, I think to this day, like, even the contemporary military is still responding. A lot of the veterans culture that grew out of that war is one that is resistant to civilians. And I think that it changed at that war.
Okay, well, let me tell you something that I get in trouble with sometimes, and I very firmly feel it. I think the loss of the draft is serious. Because when we first went in, it still existed. And what we found out is that every base we went to, the military was not in absolute control, because there were people there who were in the military, who were not military personalities, didn't really believe in it. They had gotten their college, they were there. And if you told them to do something crazy, they told you to go to hell, and they wouldn't do it. And there was this little jamming going on all the time. And if it didn't make sense, you got this back push.
Yeah.
Well, when you quit, because they weren't really military, they were going to do their little time, and they were out.
Yeah.
They were gone. So, you know, there was a different flow. Now, today, you don't have that.
All volunteer.
And you need that personality in there that says, I'm not a military personality. I look at this different, and you need to listen to me, because what you guys are doing is not, you know, that was a flow that's important,
really
and we've lost it. We don't have it anymore.
A lot of people talk about the draft as necessary because it And it doesn't necessarily have to be military service, like some kind of civil service.
Well,
Like,
absolutely. I think so. Other countries do it.
yeah.
And you can work at a park, or you can do something. I don't know. And we had lots of military people who weren't in a war.
Yeah.
They were just there.
What I find fascinating about what you're saying is that because it brings these resistant personalities into the culture of the military, which otherwise can get very kind of...
Oh, you need them.
That's very
You
interesting.
need them. Yeah. Jesus, and the Air Force doesn't. Air Force is much, I think, is much less than the rigidity that I ran into in the Navy and Marines and Army. Literally, I could not have. I could not have functioned in that.
I've interviewed somebody who was in the Air Force a little later, 71 through sort of 86, around there. And what she says is that the difference between the Air Force and the other branches is that she had a 9-to-5 job, which she had in uniform. So she would go to work in uniform.
Yeah.
But that's what it was. It was a 9-to-5 job for her.
Well, she had a 9-to-5 job, which in the world I lived in, they didn't have 9-to-5 jobs.
They didn't. No. Deborah, do you have any questions?
Well, I do have one question. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so your husband is gone. Yes. You're taking care of everything. You are the man of the house. Yes. So when he comes back. Oh boy, yes.
Very good question.
Yeah. Well, again, I have a personality flare. I don't know what it is. It's built in, and I was extremely in love with this gorgeous young man that I had married, and stayed that way, solid. And he would come home, and it was a big deal. Even when we were in L.A., not in the military, I still followed this thing. I did not take my children to pick up Daddy. Mother picked up Daddy. And when he came home, the house was clean, everything was great, and the children participated in this, and I don't think it was good for them. I look and see some problems now that they're having, but that was the way I did it. Ronald walked back into perfection. He walked back. We didn't any issues that were going on in the family were silenced until he left, because he was going to leave in 10 days or 2 weeks or something like this. And so this glorious thing, Daddy's coming home. And so he always walked back into that. He never walked back into a problem. I didn't allow it. And the kids played the same game I did. And so he didn't really see it. Yeah.
And do you think that had long-term effects later on?
I think it did on the children, and I can't tell you exactly what it was,
Yeah.
But it's not reality. It's not the way it is, Ronald would do what he could, and he helped when he could, but he wasn't there. And he was someplace else, and I was in a world where when he was in Big Spring, our first thing, the T-33s, they were gone all the time. They'd leave over the weekend. They'd pick up a student and off. There was just 2 of them in the airplane, and they went to Las Vegas all the time. I finally drove through Las Vegas one time. I don't care for Las Vegas, but and lots of stories came out of Las Vegas. But they just lived in a world where I didn't have the money to put in a parking meter to go downtown and window shop, because he was a second and first lieutenant during that period of time. And I was having babies, and I never thought anything about it. But I came from a very small town background, and came from parents who had been brought up in the Depression. In fact, I was born in 1935. So, and a lead mine in town. So I had a background that was different. And my passion were books, and my passion was music and school. It always has been. It's just basic. And I could always satisfy those. And Ronald got me a piano. I mean, I had a piano, and then I bought another one in Okinawa and brought one home with me. I don't play it all anymore, but I had that, which was...
But that impulse to create like this perfect home life
Uh-huh.
for this guy who's
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
That I thought was just I thought he was wonderful, and he was, as far as I was concerned. Yeah, we had a grand time, and he never. I think only 2 times did I ever see him inebriated. He didn't drink around me, not much, you know. And he just didn't. They separated. There was so much separated.
Yeah.
He lived and he drank martinis with the guys, and I don't know. We both did it, and it worked. It created a very nice world for us to live in.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough.
Yeah,
This has
I
been
enjoyed it. It was fun.
absolutely amazing. So I learned so much again. Like I'm just. Well, we just spoke for an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh dear.
Well,
the park at the top of the island, Okuma, that's the name of it. And I was sitting in the lounge. It was an officer's a base. It's a lovely place, and this is where we went to vacation. And you could get the glass bottom boats and go out over. It's gorgeous, lovely place. And this woman was sitting in the couch across from me, and she was looking at some magazines, and I remember in the story I talk about the fact that we had blinds, but bright light and fans, these big fans were going, and it would kind of break the light. It was flashing. And she had diamonds on her hands, which is not my world.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at her, and I was very nice because we're nice to each other. And I said something about, would you like to look at the magazine I have? And she said, thank you, but no. And something else was said, and pretty soon we had kind of a conversation. And she said to me, I'm thinking about going back to the States, which was calm. We recognized that. The minute we heard that or got around it, we knew what was going on. She was in some emotional state. And I said something about, sometimes it was difficult. And she said, yes. And then I told her the story because I had just gone through it. We had a commander's call. The commanders somehow just had a commander's call. They'd happen occasionally. Sometimes they were for a reason. But it was a party. It was a big to-do. It meant you had to go. And you had, in the world I lived in, I had to have white gloves and a hat. And I hated hats. I love hats to see, but I don't put them on. And you had to wear one. I lived up in Naha, lived up island. And I was really kind of stomping bitter about this thing. And we went to the party. And military, this is standard, every party I ever went to. They had the big long tables, all the food on the big long tables, and a big bowl, one of those big, huge bowls of martinis and Manhattans, always, and the dipper and the glass, whatever.
That's intense.
And so we were there, we were there at this damn thing, and this good friend of mine, both of us had been just, I can remember frying chicken at the stove, stomping my feet up now. I didn't want to go to this day. I didn't want to put on that hat. I was so upset. And we had a lovely evening. It turned out just gorgeous. And at the end of the evening, I had this hat that had kind of blue flowers or something in it. I don't remember what it was, but I took off the damn hat and stuffed it in the martini. And Shirley took hers off and sailed it across the room. And we both of us made our little statements there. And I told this lady this story, and she laughed. The day before, I'd been in having lunch, and this woman had come in, and there'd been an airman with her. And there'd been some sort of a big argument, and the manager had gotten in on it, and then I saw her at a picnic bench outside. Now, I don't know. This was the woman. She was the island commander's wife. And she said she'd had it. She was so tired of the rank and the nonsense that she needed to go home.
Yeah.
Whatever. Anyway, she told the story and I told the story, whatever. And we, my family, Ronald and the kids came in and broke up what we were talking about. We were very polite again and we left. She didn't laugh because I would see her at functions. And
she was very slender and very attractive, and she always had on a hat and white gloves. And there she would be in this little group, being polite, being nice, doing her little thing. And we just grin at each other across the room. I never spoke to her again. But she'd see me and I'd see her, and
There's this code.
Just grin, yeah.
You want. We both know that you want to throw that hat across the room.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I actually recorded that little story, if that's okay. 'Cause